Okay, hello and welcome to live post-game coverage of Florida State basketball presented by the FSView and Florida Flambeau. I'm your host, Ben Meyerson. I'm a staff writer for the FSU, and today I'm joined by another staff writer, Erika LeFlouria. You can expect these live streams for the rest of the Florida State games, for the rest of the regular season, including the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament. And our next broadcast will be for Wednesday's Boston College game, which is also senior night and the last home game of the season. You can find these streams on the FSView Sports Twitter page at FSView Sports. Welcome, Erika. Thanks for coming on the live stream. I really appreciate it. Maybe not the game you would have hoped to be doing for your first live stream.
No, not at all. Not at all.
That was we've been sitting here in the studio for honestly longer than I usually sit with people in the studio before I do these live streams, and that's mainly because that was about let me take these off. That was about as frustrating a game as I've seen from Florida State all season, especially if you're a Florida State fan. I mean, earlier I told you I think that was the worst game of the season. You correctly pointed out the UCF game was definitely that, but this I think could probably easily be number two. Let's just start off with a few things. It was obviously a tale of two halves. If you looked at the first half and the second half of this game, it's two completely different games, really. I mean, in the first half, Florida State forced like 14 turnovers. They turned that into 19 points, and they only committed 5 turnovers themselves. In the second half, I'm just pulling up the box score, so I want to make sure I'm correct. Florida State committed, 12 turnovers. And obviously that doesn't help. But then also Kessler for UNC, their big man, he was about having as dominant as a game as I think he's had this entire season. He had career highs in every single category. I want to ask you something before we really get into things. How consequential could this game be for Florida State? And do you think this is could be a good learning experience, or it could be something where we look back on and say that was kind of the starting point of the end for Florida State?
I really think that this is going to be a learning position for FSU, but I could see it also going the other way. With FSU this season, we've seen how they have their highs and their lows. We saw that with UFC. But the problem I see is that every time FSU is nationally recognized or they're getting closer to the top 10, that's when they seem to fold. And the pressure is something that FSU is definitely going to have to work on, considering last season they were a number 4 team. They were a hot topic team. And it's like this season, as soon as they get up there in the rankings or as soon as they get up there in the national title talks, something happens and a UNC comes about and it just doesn't go in FSU's way. So I want to hope that this isn't the downfall, but I am a little bit nervous as we go into tournament season and we start playing, other teams that aren't in the ACC, because everybody knows this isn't necessarily the picture perfect ACC season, but that still doesn't downplay how successful FSU has been when they play the teams that they're given. And a win against UNC was something that was definitely necessary and they just couldn't do.
Yeah, it was super necessary, I think, not just for one game in the regular season, but when you look at the way things are going, there's 3 games left in the season. The ACC tournament starts in about 10 days. I mean, the momentum that Florida State had and now that has been maybe taken away from them, that's something that could really hurt them, because I mean this team was rolling for a while, and like you were saying, I mean just as they're getting to the top of the ACC and as things look great for them, they fall and they drop this game. And for the ACC tournament, for the 1 seed for the ACC tournament, it's not gonna not that it doesn't matter, but Florida State can still win out and secure that.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, there's a lot less room for error now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially when you're looking at earlier, I was watching the Illinois versus Wisconsin game, and you see a number 5 Illinois and how they did end up pulling out that tough game versus a ranked opponent. But looking at FSU was not playing a ranked opponent. They were playing an unranked UNC. So it's like we're going to have to win those games, especially when we meet teams that are in the Big Ten, like Michigan or like Illinois, when it comes to tournament time.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Looking at what UNC has done over the past few years, that this doesn't even match up with what UNC has done, because they haven't beaten a top or a ranked opponent in their last 9 or 10 games versus them. I just think if you're a Florida State fan, you're hoping that this is a learning experience, like you were saying, and that they can go back and say to themselves, okay, so this team exploited us. They really found some deficiencies in what we do. Now let's figure out how we can make adjustments. And something I want to talk about, which we were talking about just before the broadcast, was, for Florida State, when they were playing Virginia, they came out weak in that second half and they struggled. But then coach took a timeout almost immediately. I think he took 2 timeouts like in the first 5 minutes, and they were able to regroup and adjust and really change the pace of the game, because it was starting to go a certain way to where it would have been much closer. Today, the opposite happened. They came out of the half. UNC came out strong. I think they started off the half on like a 10-0 run before Anthony Polite hit that first 3-pointer. And Coach Hamilton took like 2 or 3 timeouts in those first 5 or 6 minutes, and they didn't really seem to have any answers, especially for the big man Kessler from UNC. So in the recent stretch FSU has been on, I was doing a little deep diving, and in most of those games they were winning the rebounding battle, not just by a little, but by a lot. And they would really dominate in that area, where earlier in the season, especially those first like 8, 9, 10 games of the season, they were either neutral in the rebounding battle or they would lose it. And they were winning games even through that. And then they went on that great run and they were really hot and they were just dominating teams. I feel like this is the first time since January or even December where they've just been dominated physically, especially on the boards.
Yeah, to me, it looked like FSU and UNC just completely switched playbooks. FSU took a page from what UNC was doing in the first half, and UNC saw how successful FSU was and took advantage of that. It looked like they just completely switched playbooks, and UNC saw what they needed to work on, and they went with that. And on the contrary, FSU, in a sense, was kind of coasting through. And one thing was Rayquan Grey, even though he did have an amazing performance with 17 points, it kind of felt like he took a backseat in the second half. And I feel like that also generated to the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That just that energy, especially at the end of the second half. I don't want to say it didn't seem like they cared, but it seemed like UNC cared a lot more than FSU cared about winning that game. I can tell you that. And let's not go all negative, though, because I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to do that. Let's talk a little bit about the good half for Florida State. Like I mentioned earlier, in the first half of this game, Florida State, they forced 14 turnovers. They had 19 points off of those. Scottie Barnes had like 4 steals in the first half, which matches his career high. I think, and I'm writing the article for the newspaper for our game. In the first half, FSU showed the best of their team. They showed why they're considered the best team in the conference, how they have so many different playmakers, and the fact that offensively, if you're going to take away one thing from Florida State, they're just going to go to another thing, and then they're going to keep going because they have so many different options. So what did you see in that first half? What do you think they were doing well?
The first half, it felt like forever ago, honestly, because the second half just dragged on. But the first half, one thing I did notice was, they kept talking about on the announcers, they kept talking about Rayquan Grey and how he was being a true leader. And that's when I saw his peak performance of what we had been seeing throughout the rest of the season. The first half it reminded me a lot of the go-getter attitude they had in the Virginia win. And it also reminded me a lot of the other victories that FSU has had, like the Wake Forest victory or the North Carolina State victories. And it looked like a team that was well put together. They had 41 points. They were coming close to matching their 49 points they had in the first half against Miami. And FSU looked like an all-around good team, especially on the defensive end. We saw a lot of rebounds. We saw Scottie Barnes getting the ball, even though he did go out for a short period. I don't know what that was about. I think it might have been an ankle injury, but he was perfectly fine within minutes. But I saw a go-getter attitude, especially on the defense for FSU, and that was something I definitely think we can look forward to when March Madness comes, if they decide to keep that going the entire game instead of just one half.
Yeah, and I think that was really what was key for Florida State is they were not only playing into their game plan and the way they want to play, but they were executing so well. There
Mm-hmm.
was so the thing I love about covering and watching this team is that they do all the little things well, and their decision making is so on point. It's really impressive, especially on the defensive end, just the way players will use their arms, cut off passing lanes, do all these small things that add up over the course of the game, it feels like. And especially in that first half, I mean, things added up for them. They forced so many turnovers. They created so many opportunities off of that, and they fed off that energy. And like you're saying, Rayquan Grey, I think he's quickly become like the engine of this team. He seems to be controlling things on offense, and it seems like whenever they need a bucket and they're struggling within the flow of their offense, the play for them is just to get the ball to Rayquan and have him do something, whether it's back down a defender, get off the dribble, whatever. They're like, Rayquan, you're going to bring up the ball or get it at the top of the key and just figure out how to get a bucket for us. So I think, like you're saying, that what we saw in the first half is the best of what we've seen out of Florida State and the type of team you would like to see in March, especially when they're playing maybe a team against, like you're saying, Indiana, who played really, really well, and not just in a first half of a game, but played well down to a good team. So, I don't want to spend too much time on the first half, though, because there's a lot to break down in terms of what was going on in the second half. And I think, this is, to me, watching this team as closely as I've gotten to, it seems like they really struggled almost every single one of these last few games coming out of the second half with slow starts. Like I was saying, whether it be versus Virginia or even that Wake Forest game that they went into overtime with. Why do you think teams are able to come out and change things up and attack Florida State? I mean, because to me, I think that's what's happening. Teams will go and make adjustments and realize that whatever they were trying to do against Florida State in the first half just wasn't working. So why are teams so successful when they make those adjustments?
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw with North Carolina. I saw a team that knew what they did wrong in the first half, and they immediately wanted to fix it. I mean, their head coach is Roy Williams. His name speaks for himself. He knows how to win against dominant teams, and Florida State is no different. And they saw what they needed to adjust, and the main portion that they needed to fix was defensively. And turning over into the second half, when it came to defending Florida State, North Carolina completely won that battle. They beat out Rayquan Grey, and they honestly started to look like a team that should be up there in the ACC. They didn't reflect the record that they had, especially in the second half. So they saw the adjustments, and they took advantage of a Florida State team that really didn't mold their game plan to a different level in the second half.
Yeah, I think that's, I think what they, like you're saying, Roy Williams is a great coach. He got his 900th win in this game, and the adjustments he made was key. But and what I saw really was they saw the spots that they had and where they succeeded against Florida State, and then they exploited those. I think even in that first half, Coach Leonard Hamilton was saying this as much after the game, that this team really struggled rebounding against UNC. They couldn't get their positioning well, especially on the offensive boards. UNC seemed to get so many second chance opportunities, and it seemed like there were so many plays where it was just a matter of effort to me. So I think, in a lot of ways, I'm sure people are going to point out at things in the second half with how Florida State shot and the turnovers and, all this different stuff. But I really feel like this game came down to the fact that Florida State they couldn't match UNC's energy that they had in the second half.
Yeah.
And once UNC got rolling, it was just a matter of when the game was going to end, because I don't think Florida State was ever going to catch up with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I know in the first half, FSU was looking like an amazing team. They were looking like the number 11 team in the nation. And I know at one point, FSU led by as many as 16 points. And that's not going to sit right with North Carolina in their house in Chapel Hill. And they made the adjustments to that. And I saw in the second half, we saw guys who weren't as dominant in the first half, looking at Caleb Love, and I was looking at Karen Watson from North Carolina, who were doing amazing once they came to the second half, because they saw what they needed to fix. They were seeing that they needed to get more into the paint. They needed to be more aggressive against FSU and even challenge Rayquan Grey a little bit more than they were in the first half. And that proved to be effective for them. And that's why I think the game turned out the way it did, because they made the adjustments in the locker room. And on the contrary, it kind of felt like FSU was a little stagnant in how they came out after the second half. They just kind of stayed with what they knew. But North Carolina, even though they have that 14-8 record, but now it's 15-8, they are still a dominant team. And that's also a team that Florida State hasn't played in quite a while. So I don't know. This game was a lot of different emotions, but I definitely want to see it be a learning opportunity for FSU to maybe switch up how they approach the second half.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that's got to be key for the rest of the season, is that this team needs to have something to fall on besides what their initial game plan is going to be, because, I think Leonard Hamilton is very underrated as an X's and O's coach, but today he didn't really show that off. Against UVA, I think they did such a good job slowing down the guards for UVA, especially, and figuring out different ways that they could keep them at bay. But in this game, it seemed like, if there were adjustments made, I personally really didn't see them, because it seemed like to me, like I was saying earlier, UNC just said, okay, we did this well in the first half. We didn't do this well. So we're not going to have as many turnovers. We're going to be smart with the ball. We're going to try and make sure we keep the ball moving, because we know Florida State's going to keep their hands out and be reaching all the time as much as they are. And I think there's definitely a lot to learn from in this game. And I think, I don't doubt Coach Hamilton's ability to bounce back from a game. And I guess if anything, if you want to be very positive as a Florida State fan, you could say maybe this could be a launching point into the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament, considering how we've seen this team react to losses, to breaks, and to adversity this year. So, I think that's fair to point out, even though we're trying to be as critical and as fair as possible. There is that aspect of Florida State to where they respond very well to teams. So I think that has to be acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that FSU will be finishing off their season against a Boston College team and a Notre Dame team who have not had the best years, FSU can definitely use this as a launching pad to do a little bit better. They know what to work on. Coach Ham knows what he's doing. That man is one of the greatest coaches I've ever seen. So he's definitely going to use this as an opportunity to build from and learn from as they go a little bit deeper and they play a little bit harder.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you kind of sort of mentioned something I want to get into, which is the rest of the season for Florida State. Something I saw just before the Miami game is that FSU was the odds-on favorite to win the ACC tournament. And it quite honestly wasn't as close as even I thought it would be. So do you think coming out of a game like this, and we'll see the rankings and see where Florida State falls Monday, How do you think this affects their stock? Because obviously like I mentioned earlier, they still have that track for the number one seed in the ACC. If they win out, they get it. Simple as that. But what do you think about them being recognized on the national stage? Not only from the media and everything, but especially from a betting perspective, so much of that isn't necessarily the X's and O's. It's how the public thinks about the games and how they're going to be betting on things. So I thought it was really interesting, that aspect, to see Florida State as the odds-on favorite, and by quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Seeing that this is a year where we're not really going to expect a Duke, or we're not going to expect even a North Carolina to be in that realm. And we've already kind of handled it to Virginia. They haven't really been able to get back up. So seeing that FSU is, a favorite for the ACC is 100% believable. But looking on the national end of it, that also does a little bit give more adversity to FSU. A lot of people aren't going to trust, their standing. They're going to be like, oh, well, the ACC wasn't at its peak. And they're going to look at the Big Ten. They're going to even look at the SEC, how Auburn and Alabama are doing. And they're going to say, well, Florida State's not necessarily playing those teams. Yeah, they took down Virginia, but they're also going to point to this loss versus North Carolina. So I do believe that it might help FSU in the ACC by having these easier opponents and not having these peak conference champions. But at the same time, on the national level, it's going to be hard for FSU to get their name out there and to be known as a dominant force. But like I said earlier, I feel like FSU thrives off of adversity. I don't think FSU will play to their best ability when they're in the top 10. I don't know. It's just something about Leonard Hamilton's game. I think he wants FSU to be doubted because he wants that challenge to be, oh, okay, Leonard Hamilton, he's going to get this game, but nobody's going to believe it unless you're in Tallahassee or you're an FSU fan. And I just feel like he thrives off of that adversity. So it's going to be interesting to see how people are going to probably look down on FSU nationally, but it's not going to matter to Coach Ham and in the ACC, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be it's really interesting to see how, I think, for the rest of the season, how the national perspective plays out with Florida State, especially, if they do face more adversity, because I think this is a team that everyone acknowledges is a potential very, very dangerous team in the NCAA tournament, because, even against the best team in the country, they have the athletes to match up with anyone, and they have the size and the speed and everything like that, to where, you could viably say that they could compete with those top teams. But then on the same time, like you're saying, whenever it seems like whenever they're getting to certain heights, they fall a little bit, they fall a rung down the ladder. So what are you thinking about how how do you think they'll finish the season, and how important do you think the ACC tournament is? And do you think, as you're saying that, in my mind to myself, I'm like, if they lose in the ACC tournament to Virginia or Virginia Tech, you think they come back even stronger for the NCAA tournament? So what are your thoughts on that? And how do you see the rest of the season playing out from Leonard Hamilton's perspective?
Yeah, regular season, I feel like FSU's got this in the bag when they play Boston College and they play Notre Dame. But the ACC tournament is going to be very vital for FSU if they want to solidify that they are a national team that can go up against Gonzaga, can go up against Michigan, and can potentially bring a national championship to Tallahassee. And if they do have a mishap versus a Virginia team, whether it be Tech or UVA, that'll be very detrimental for FSU. But also, like I said, I just feel like Coach Ham, he likes the adversity. He likes to be doubted because that's his opportunity to prove them wrong, especially with the guys that he has on the team. I want to talk about Rayquan Grey for a second. He went from being a redshirt to being the senior leader that he is now. And you see Scottie Barnes, he's only a freshman, but he's playing like this at this high level. FSU is a team that I feel like loves being in the misfit section. They like to be the ones that are a put together team, but not always talked about. They're not always going to be talked about like the Texas Longhorns, or they're not going to be talked about even how people talk about Auburn after they beat Tennessee last night. And I also feel like that's okay for FSU. So when they go out and they play in the ACC tournament, and if they do their best and potentially win out the ACC, that's a huge deal for FSU. But if they also lose, that's a huge deal for them to use it as a learning opportunity to go into March Madness and make the most of their time playing teams that aren't in their conference and aren't, someone they've met in the past recent years.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I think any way, if you're a Florida State fan, any way you want to spin it, you can spin it. I think if you want to be really positive, there are things you can say. Oh, we just lost. We always come off these losses big. All that kind of stuff. But there are a lot of worries. I think UNC proved that there is a blueprint to beat this Florida State team. Well, Balls has been great this season, and I think he has, and I've been harping how good he's been and how underrated I believe he is. But I think today the Bigs really struggled against UNC, and that's kind of a vulnerability that I think it was probably acknowledgeable, but up until this point, maybe wasn't as exploited as UNC exploited it tonight.
Yeah, I saw one thing that I noticed with UNC, they really worked on playing in the paint in the second half. In the first half, they were focusing more on the free throw line. They were focusing more on the arc. But in the second half, they got physical in the paint, and they were just they were pointing out Florida State's flaws. Like you were just saying, they were taking advantage of the big bodies, and they were being extremely physical and extremely athletic. And that's why I feel like they won that game, is because their play in the paint in the second half was just too much for FSU to handle at some points.
Yeah, I think it definitely was. It was just too much for Florida State to handle by the end of the game. It's something I wanted to ask you a little bit about as we end here, is Rayquan Grey. You mentioned him a few minutes ago. This is his 10th straight game with double-digit points. I think he finished with I believe 17 and like 8 rebounds. But he's been playing himself not just into, like I was saying earlier, the engine of this team, but he's been playing himself into a very viable NBA role. I think in one of my past broadcasts, I had compared him, at least physically, to Draymond Green in the NBA. And I think seeing the way he was barreling down the court today, just seeing all the different things he does, I don't think he's maybe not the best player is the right word to use, but I feel like he's the best all-around player on this team. So what do you think about that? And can you talk a little bit about his skill set? Because I feel like he's just one of the most skilled players on this team.
Yeah, I actually like that comparison to Draymond Green. He is a very physical yet vocal player on the team, and he's a part of a lot of FSU's success. I covered the FSU versus Wake Forest game, and that was the game they played right before Virginia. And in that game, Rayquan Grey just completely took charge of the team. And I love the fact that FSU has that dual leadership with him and MJ Walker. And I feel like that also benefits Rayquan Grey in a sense where he doesn't have to have everything on him. So he's not necessarily going to get tired out all the time. So he can put up double doubles or triple doubles in games because he is used to that leadership position, but he also gets help from MJ Walker. And in this game, even against North Carolina, it didn't go in FSU's favor, but he still had 17 points. And he still was out there leading FSU in the first half and in the second half. I just feel like he is going to be an amazing all-around player for not only FSU, but where he goes in the NBA. I don't know if he's going to stay. I know he has the option to stay, I believe, due to COVID, but it's most likely that he's going to go to the NBA. But he really does model after Draymond Green of being that big physical.
Oh, I think we lost Erika, but that's okay. I'll just keep going here for a second. I was just gonna say based off what Eric. Oh, I think you cut out there for a second, but I got you back. I was just saying that I don't know where you cut off, but I was just agreeing with what you said about Rayquan, how I feel like like, and you were talking about a little bit the growth from that redshirt kid, to all the way to where he is now has been so impressive. But I feel like the thing that maybe has helped him out the most is the control he has now over himself and his body. And I think it's been highlighted so much that he's 260 pounds, right? He's still that weight from last season, but now that weight is all muscle, and he's much more just toned. So what do you think about his growth? And can you talk a little bit about how that's just, I feel like he's kind of one of he can define the Florida State program in a lot of ways, just because of the way you look at the way he came in and how he's changed and how he's improved and how he's bought in.
Yeah, one thing I was nervous about was FSU losing 3 players to the NBA, and honestly, he eased every ache and pain I had about that, because he just stepped up to the plate. He knew the leadership role that he had to take on as being, a seniority position with MJ Walker, and that's something I really respect about him. He goes from being a redshirt who really didn't have that much playing time at Florida State, really didn't make a huge impact at Florida State, to now a team player who we really can't imagine life without Rayquan Grey at FSU, especially during the season. So to see how far he's grown, both physically and mentally, is been just completely amazing. I know after the Wake Forest game, Scottie Barnes was talking about how big of an impact Rayquan Grey is in the locker room, how he's encouraging players week after week, and how he works with Coach Hamilton to get the team on the right mindset. And he's just grown completely beyond all measures that he should have been at being a redshirt since the beginning of being at Florida State. And I really admire that about him, and that's another reason why I feel like he is a mirror of Rayquan Grey. Not exactly, but pretty good.
I think there are definitely a lot of similarities people can point to, and things that you can pick out in his game to very much Draymond like, and I've been loving using that comparison recently, because in a lot of ways he's very similar to him. But I think he's maybe not a more modern version, but he's a little more mobile than even Draymond is at times. Just how comfortable he is handling the ball. But something I wanted to ask you about, and something we can finish on as our very last question, is how many future pros do you feel like could be on this Florida State team? Because I think this is something I've been trying to ask all my guests recently, because while I think it's a very tough question, because it's obviously hard to project how these guys will filter out 2-3 years down the line. As you look up and down this Florida State roster, I think MJ Walker, Scottie Barnes are most definitely going to be NBA players, if not this year, for MJ, maybe even next, but MJ is going to go at some point. You like we were saying, Rayquan Grey. I believe Balsa has all the skill in the world to be able to make it. I got this great quote from Leonard Hamilton. I want to say earlier this week, where I asked him about Balsa and what he thought about him and just how underrated he was. And Coach Ham straight up said he thinks it's the best big man he's ever had at his school, especially recently, even better than Kabengele and some of the guys they've had. So how many future pros do you feel like could be on this team?
Yeah, going through the list, I'm looking at the roster right now. Honestly, this team, if they continue to be dominant, I could say the whole team, but I definitely think Rayquan Grey is going to be there. Balsa, of course, is going to be there. MJ Walker, no doubt. Scottie Barnes isn't a question. One person I do kind of want to highlight and shout out is the future that Anthony Polite could have. Anthony Polite is a really talented player, and I don't think he gets the recognition that he deserves all the time. And, he did have a couple games out this season due to injury. But I feel like with a couple more years and a couple more seasons under Hamilton's belt, he could potentially be up there and going to an NBA team. I could see some more going. I'm just looking through. And I'm like, wow, this team is really talented. Blake Osborne too. When he's healthy, he's a really talented player.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just hit on what you're saying, because Anthony Polite, that's someone I brought up every time I bring up this question. And I don't mention him
Hmm.
initially because I almost feel like people won't do it. And then I get to come around and say, oh, what about Anthony Polite? But if you really look at his skill set and just his role on this team,
Hmm.
Leonard Hamilton calls him the best perimeter defender. He's the perfect
Yeah.
3-and-D guy for the NBA. I mean, he is. I think if anything, you could look at him and maybe you could say he doesn't have the athleticism that all the other guys at his position might have going into the draft. But in terms of the overall skill set and what he can do
Hmm.
for an NBA team, I think there's no doubt that he has the skill set to be able to work in the NBA.
Yeah, even in this game, I know there was a play in the second half, FSU was going ghost, and Anthony Polite just goes behind the arc and gets a three and made it look easy. He literally made it look easy for FSU, and that's something I could see being beneficial to an NBA team in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're gonna finish up here now in a minute. I just want to remind everyone that if you're watching, you can catch our next broadcast for Boston College game on Monday. That's the last home game of the season. It's going to be senior night. Um, Erika, what do you feel like with this team? What do we've talked about what could happen, all the possibilities, the ACC tournament, how they could respond. What do you think will happen with this team for the rest of the season? And do you think they have national title potential, or do you think that that's something that is just too out of reach for this team?
Absolutely not. I think FSU has the potential to be a national title contender, Final Four team, Elite Eight. I see it in FSU. The way they handled the adversity of losing three very talented players and also losing last season, not getting to compete when everybody thought that would be our title year. So seeing how they're playing this year and seeing how hungry they are, and as you've talked about multiple times during this live stream, that FSU tends to come back when they get put down. So I want to see how FSU is going to take this North Carolina loss and make it their advantage. So I definitely think FSU has the potential to be up there, because I've been seeing, like, I watched the Illinois game and Illinois played Wisconsin, and I've seen Michigan play this season, and I've seen all these different teams play, and I'm like, FSU is, to me personally, a better all-around team. We don't necessarily have one guy you could point out to be the leader, but that's perfectly fine for a team that's coached by Leonard Hamilton. And that's why I think that it can benefit us in the long run. Going into this game, we really didn't know who was going to be in the lineup. We had three guys out, and MJ Walker still found a way out there and still made the most, got his 1,000 points. And having a good all-around team is going to be important when it gets to the long run of going through March. And that's why I feel like FSU could be a national title contender, just because they have so many different pieces that can step up to the plate if necessary.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think against the top end teams, they definitely have the ability to do so. And like you're saying, with a Leonard Hamilton team, with all the depth he has, this is the type of team that he could definitely win with. So I think that's definitely fair to point out. I think that's important to point out because this is, I think, his ideal team. Not maybe last year's team is a great team, and they should get all the respect in the world, obviously. But this is a team that can do so many different things and do it in so many different types of ways. And I think that's what Coach Hamilton's got to love about this team. But we're going to finish up here. And before we do, I just want to give you a chance to shout out anything you want to tell the people about that's upcoming on your radar.
I don't really have anything. Y'all can check out my latest swim article. I talked to the swim team captain. That was really fun to do. So
Yeah, and everyone should definitely check out all the work that you and I do on the FSView sports page on our Twitter. And then, of course, FSUnews.com. Everyone should check that out. You can read great stuff there all the time. So we're going to end here now. And like I said, the next live stream will be for the Boston College game on Wednesday. Have a great night, everyone.